I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. President-elect Donald Trump has nominated Brendan Carr as the next chair of the FCC. Carr is already the senior-ranking Republican on the FCC, but free press advocates are sounding the alarm about what his appointment could mean under a new administration. Joining us now is one of the people who is sounding those alarms. He is Craig Aaron. He's the co-CEO of the Free Press Action Fund, a 501c4. Craig, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we dive into what's going on here, I just want to zoom back because the FCC is not a government agency that most people spend their day-to-day thinking about. So can we just set the table here? What is the FCC and how does it affect regular Americans' lives on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. Well, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, is supposed to be the independent government agency that's looking out for the public, for consumers when it comes to their internet connections, their cell phone. The FCC's job is basically to watch the public airwaves. So that includes broadcast television and radio, the parts of the airwaves that use a cell phone signal. They also regulate cable television, of course, broadcast television and all of that. So it's their job to be the public's watchdog for those using the public airwaves. That's what they're supposed to be doing. Unfortunately, what's happened often, and I fear is about to happen again, is that the Federal Communications Commission is actually being used to do the bidding of already powerful media companies, billionaires like Elon Musk and others.
Now, in announcing his choice of Brendan Carr to lead the FCC, President-elect Trump called Carr a warrior for free speech, end quote. Yet you, Craig, disagree, I think, to say the least. Can you talk about why it is that President-elect Trump says Carr is a warrior for free speech, yet you say the opposite?
Well, I think we have some different definitions of free speech. The free speech that I worry about is the government intruding on free speech, the government using its power to limit what newsrooms can do, how those in power are held accountable. And one reason I'm very nervous about Commissioner Carr becoming Chairman Carr of the FCC is because when he was asked directly during campaign season about threats being made by then candidate Trump over fact-checking that happened during the ABC debate or interviews with Vice President Harris on 60 Minutes, Carr refused to rule out the FCC looking at the broadcast licenses of these networks. So the FCC has a lot of power over these companies, over their ability to access the airwaves, over their ability to do business. So the idea that a would-be regulator is actually threatening news organizations for fact-checking, news organizations for asking hard questions, that feels like a real abuse of power in what the FCC is supposed to do. And it has me very anxious after a record already of Commissioner Carr, where I think he's voted against just about every pro-consumer thing that the FCC has done during the Biden administration. So I'm very concerned now that he'll be setting the agenda, calling the shots, that he's actually someone who's not going to be protecting free speech, but a free speech warrior in the sense that he's going to be going after those who are exercising their free speech rights to criticize the president.
So we're entering a reality, or perhaps we've been in this reality since 2015, where free speech is in the eye of the beholder, almost?
Yes, and what I worry about it is free speech just in the hands of the billionaires. So if you have enough money to buy your own social media platform, if you have enough money to have your own cable television network, maybe you can still ensure those protections. But we know, if they start coming after the individual journalists, and maybe CBS or the New York Times has the budget to stand up to government intrusion, but there are a lot of outlets out there who are going to be covering what's happening at the local level. What happens if this new administration begins to carry out their plans to round up immigrants or other things they've promised to do? Can they expect that they too could really come under government scrutiny? Are we going to see broadcast licenses start to be taken away because the president doesn't like their coverage? I didn't think we were going to be living in that world, but when asked directly, you would expect a would-be chairman of the FCC to say, that's ridiculous, I'm here to stand up for the First Amendment. But that's not what Brendan Carr has said. What Brendan Carr said is, well, we'd have to look into it. What Brendan Carr has said is, I'm not going to make diversity or equity a priority at the FCC anymore, even though only a tiny percentage of television and radio stations are owned by people of color. What Brendan Carr has shown is he's going to vote against rules to protect the free and open internet, measures to protect consumers, and a lot of measures to protect the most vulnerable in our society, people who are getting ripped off on phone calls because a member of their family happens to be incarcerated, others who can barely afford that internet connection that's so important for them to get a job or get an education. In all of those cases, Brendan Carr has sided with the biggest companies, and especially with Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who he has spent much of the last year buttering up and saying to them, I'm your guy, I'm going to look out for you. And now he's being rewarded for that.